We owe it to him.
I don't owe anyone anything.
Hey everybody, it's Hannah Saulic, the head of video here at CinemaBlend, with Sean O'Connell, our managing editor and author of the released Snyder Cut book. And Zack Snyder's Justice League is officially out by the time you guys are watching this video, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Isn't that just crazy to say out loud? We are going to be talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League. We have seen it.
Yeah, Hannah and I were texting each other earlier saying, can you honestly believe that we are about to break down, the actual footage?
It still feels so surreal. It's great. Yeah, we're not speculating anymore. This is it. It's awesome.
Also, we don't have to warn you about spoilers because we would assume that if you're watching this video breakdown, that you have caught up with the 4-hour epic that is Justice League. But one of the things that we loved about this presentation is that the chapter breaks, the chapter stops, really do create a sense of, weirdly, momentum as it propels you through it, but also really nice spots of closure if, for whatever reason, you want to watch it in segments. And so we come up with this idea to break down the 7 different chapters for Zack Snyder's Justice League and really analyze them piece by piece.
Is that way you do this?
All right, so let's start. Before we actually get to chapter 1 in Zack Snyder's Justice League, we have 2 kind of different opening sequences. So let's start by talking about the new perspective of Superman's death.
One of the things that stood out to me immediately, and I've gone back to sort of revisit it before we went into this chapter, is that I wonder if Zack was preparing it for... I don't think he was going to shoot this in 3D, but it absolutely caught my eye when we come around Doomsday and the Kryptonian spear is sticking out. That was the only element that struck me as 3D, but I thought, this would be really badass in a 3D presentation.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. You're right.
He has talked about the fact that the Superman scream is what ignites the mother boxes. I understand that it's important for us to sort of catch up with where we left off in BVS. I think it sets the tone for how much he's going to use slow motion over the course of this, because it's absolutely one of the examples of a scene that we watch in slow motion. But I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the pacing.
Yeah, I like that it kept that same pattern. In BVS, we start with the Man of Steel attack from Bruce's perspective. So in this, it's kind of like a continuation of the story. And I went back through to just look at the ending of BVS to see if any of those close-up reaction shots were in BVS. So we do not see Lois's point of view shot that is in Zack Snyder's Justice League, and we do not see Wonder Woman's point of view shot that is in Zack Snyder's Justice League. But there is a shot that's very, very similar of Ben Affleck's Batman in BVS that we see at the beginning of Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's not the exact same, but I really liked it. I think, too, for people who might have not seen BVS in a while, it's just a good refresher of kind of where these characters are at emotionally. The Batman one, which I just love Ben Affleck's performance in that shot. I almost got chills just with the look in his eyes. But yeah, I do agree the slow-mo was definitely setting the tone, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Well, and we will try, I think, over the course of this series to not make repeated comparisons to 2017. We're going to have to mention it a couple of different times. But the only reason why I'm bringing it up in this aspect is that this is a much stronger way to open your Justice League story than what we got in 2017.
Did you ever fight a hippo?
And we'll never understand the decision process behind how they decided to open that. Think about the amount of time and money and energy that was expended to create that Batman on a rooftop thing.
Yeah, oh my God.
To essentially convey how bad the parademons look, and the criminal saying
It's because they know he's dead, right? Superman.
Just revisiting Superman's death and sacrifice and showing that the scream is unlocking the mother boxes, because we see it in Cyborg's closet as it's spreading out. And then, of course, we see it at the Atlantean kingdom and in the Amazonian kingdom, or the Amazon kingdom. And it's just a so much more effective way to open the movie.
Well, I was just going to say, I love to, when they cut to the Amazon's mother box and that dome, there's the way that Zack builds suspense for that. It's I know what's going to happen, but I thought it was really effective. And I love that it kind of leaves on that cliffhanger of it splits open. And then I think we then cut to Bruce in the mountains.
We do, yes. And he's beginning his journey to get to Arthur. And there's so many cool things about We talked about how the longer theatrical cut was going to allow them to include character beats and dialogue that proves so much more or establishes so much more effectively who the members of the League are. And there's bits of dialogue in that, although I guess we're getting into chapter 1 at this point. Before we get to that, about how Bruce, like, he climbed over the mountains to get to where, you know, like, it's been iced over, like nothing can get into where we are. He said he came on foot, you know, and the guy's like, that's impossible. But, like, he's fucking Batman, you know? Like, yes, it makes sense that you're establishing that Bruce is somebody who would go to great lengths in order to get to Arthur. And so I think that that's really strong as well, too.
And I think, too, like, those opening shots, or I guess they're not opening shots, but of Bruce in the mountains, like, they just set the scale, too, for, like, how epic this really is. And you mentioned, I didn't know Fabian Wagner was involved in Game of Thrones, but I did get a little bit of, like, Game of Thrones vibes from some of those establishing shots, and I just thought they were beautiful.
And they make me sad that I haven't seen him on a theater screen.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's ratioed, you know, it's that 1:3 aspect ratio, and it's tailored for an IMAX screen.
Yeah.
And I know that it's an HBO Max play right now, and they want to get subscriptions. But I pray that eventually we get to a point where Zack is able to
One day,
release this
will.
theatrically.
It's very important.
But I literally cheered, because it arrives right before the stop to get into chapter 1, that it says directed by Zack Snyder. You know, like that to me was such the triumphant moment of just like, F you, this is my version. Here it is, directed by Zack Snyder, and I pumped my fist and cheered the first time I saw it.
Okay, so let's move into the actual chapter 1 of Zack Snyder's Justice League. So the first scene that we see is Bruce recruiting Arthur Curry.
Bruce Wayne. The business card.
That was pretty good.
Right. Thank you. I've been practicing my Icelandic. Well, and that gets into how this scene plays out versus 2017, which is where they worked in so many jokes, you know, and the bad reshoots, and you could tell how Ben looks different in the reshoots, and they took a perfectly great scene, perfectly effective scene, and tried to punch in humor, and I think we're going to get a lot of examples of that.
Yeah, and the thing that struck me, well, I'm not going to like go through and explain the scene because everybody's seen it, I'm assuming, if they're watching this, but I don't understand why they would take out Bruce's money as a motivator to get Arthur to talk to him. Like, that makes sense instead of like in theatrical cut. And I'm sorry, but we have to compare it to theatrical cut to just talk about how absurd this is. Because this was like, I could not stop thinking about this. Of like, who the hell thought this was a good idea? Okay, so when Bruce is like,
I'll give you $25,000 to talk to this man right now.
in the theatrical cut, Arthur turns and he's like,
Nokud visum allautimi av doktorsen.
but in Zack Snyder's Justice League, the main like villager guy is like,
How dare this dog speak to us like children? We are poor, not stupid.
so it makes more sense of like, they don't believe Bruce that he has that money. And then when Arthur pins him up against the wall and like whips out the money in theatrical cut, they just punch in on that shot of Bruce so you can't see like the wad of cash in his hand. But I'm just like, that makes so much more sense, and you're not like setting up this like stupid, petty, like alpha male like situation. It's just like, oh my God. I thought it worked so much better.
It also goes to a great length over the rest of the chapter 2 to establish Bruce's wealth. I mean, like, when he helicopters back to Alfred and boards his own private jet, like, it's not a private jet, it's a massive plane. And Zack's Justice League throughout the course of the movie is not afraid to lean into the things that make Bruce Wayne different. Like, he's a guy essentially surrounded by gods, but his wealth is what elevates him, and his ability to pour that wealth back into a lot of his inventions that he uses. And so when you get to the flying fox, you know, and Diana's kind of like, oh, a new toy for you to work on sort of thing, like, you're reminded again that this guy has enormous wealth, and so using his money to infiltrate, you know, Aquaman's stronghold and get him to talk is absolutely something Bruce would do.
Yeah, and it sets up too like Arthur's relationship with the village. Like, he genuinely cares about helping these people, and like that's his main motivator, not, I don't even think he had a real motivator in theatrical cut.
No, he didn't. But this cut also, so I wanted to touch on this part too, because there's dialogue that's really important that talks about like kind of why Arthur doesn't want to join the League initially. and he talks about how
I want to be left alone.
and they do a lot better job of establishing the fact that Arthur he's not interested in his draw to Atlantis and to his recruitment to his people. I think we'll get into that into a later chapter when he meets with Volko. But each member of the Justice League in this version, in the longer 4-hour cut, is kind of damaged in a certain way. You know, there's something that's absolutely not broken, but like different about them. And for Arthur, it's the fact that he's dedicated to the surface world, but he knows that he has another legacy that he has to live up to. With Cyborg, it's of course the relationship with his father and the decision his father made. With Barry, it's the fact that his father's in prison. It's a lot of parental issues.
A lot of trust issues too, in a way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, you know, just dialogue that's included in there that allows those characters to develop and grow. So I love the fact that it's included.
Well, and there's something else too when like Bruce is trying to bargain with him right before he goes into the water, where he says, you know, we owe it to him. And I thought that more so than theatrical cut, that exchange really helped highlight, like, to Bruce even, like, you kind of see the realization on his face of like, oh, this is my thing. Like, I can't, like, not everyone's going to care about my guilt and what I think I owe to Superman. Like, it's bigger than that a little bit. And I think it speaks more to then in the scene with the tarmac where Alfred's like, maybe you're not cut out to be a recruiter, man, or whatever.
Yeah. How great too does Affleck look? Like, he just looks so damn cool as Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, he does.
You know, on the tarmac of that heading to the airplane with the sunglasses. Yeah,
I loved that scene. Well, we'll get to that in a second, but really quickly before we move on from the Bruce recruiting Arthur scene, what did you think of the villagers singing as Aquaman
it's different.
jumps into the water?
It's different. We can get to the use of music. We can start talking about it now if you want to, because we're going to get to Lois gets introduced, you know, shortly after this scene, and she's picking up coffee and she's bringing it to the police officer who is stationed at Monument Park, essentially. And she gets a lengthy song that goes with her. And I started to realize on this rewatch through in preparing for these chapter breaks that everybody gets a lengthy song when they're introduced.
A lot of lengthy
some of them
songs.
Some of them work much better than others. The first sort of indication that music is going to be a pretty strong component to the way the Justice League plays out is the singing villagers. And I think you nailed it in that when they started singing and the one of them sniffed the sweater, I was like, this is a choice. And it was cool. I liked it. And then they launched into like another verse of it. And I was like, oh, we're still going. Okay. Yeah, I thought it was going to pay off to something, but then it just kind of ends.
I just thought it went on like way too long. Like when it started, I was like, oh, this is an interesting, like I thought that song was going to carry us into whatever the next scene is, and it does eventually. But this is, I think, one of the prime examples of like, could have been tightened up a little bit, because there's even like, once the song has like been like on long enough, you know, there's like, it kind of zooms in on Bruce's face. And I'm like, why didn't they just match cut to then the next scene, which is Martha Kent up close, like having a similar look of, you know, hopelessness on her face a little bit. And I'm like, why did we need to then like go back to the villager, have her smell the sweater, which is a little weird. I mean, like I get it, like it shows the significance and like they care about him, great. But then it's like, and then we have to like watch Bruce walk away. I get what they were trying to do with that, and to like signify Aquaman's, you know, almost like, I don't want to say rock star status, but like he's kind of like their savior in a way, and like
holy status, like a religious sort of gospel status.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that like the lead singer like picked up the sweater was with like such care. I was like, I get it. You're gonna go like store that for him, and I don't know. I just don't know that it was necessary.
I saw them at the beginning too, like when Bruce is going into the tavern restaurant. What is that thing?
I'll call it a tavern.
Yeah. Before the smash cut to part 1 or chapter 1, the singers are outside, so maybe they're prepping. They're prepping their big number.
God.
We're gonna be ready to sing.
So I wonder, do you think that is like? I mean, I'm assuming it's just a ritual that they sing that every time he leaves. I don't know. Anyway,
why not? Thanking them for bringing fish on the king tide.
All right, so let's talk about Martha saying goodbye to the Kent farm really quick. How did you feel about that whole subplot?
I could see it's easily something that you could... We're going to say this, I think, a lot when we talk about different things. Like, I could see that you could easily cut it out. You don't need it. But I'm glad it's there, right? Like, I would stand by the fact that there is a brilliant 3-hour version of this movie. And that there's a bunch of scenes that when you go back to rewatch, and I'll point out a few of them as we get into other chapters, of just like, I'm glad I saw this, but anytime I kind of go to rewatch it, I'll just fast forward past this.
Well, it confused me too, because that's an element that they kept in theatrical cut. And I'm like, if you're trying to trim a Justice League movie, I don't think we need to see Martha Kent move only to move back in at the end.
But I guess it just shows the struggles that she would go through without Clark being there. And without Jonathan being there, you know, for her to essentially have other people to lean on. It didn't bother me. It didn't bother me.
It didn't bother me, but on second watch, I was like, why do we need this? But,
yeah, well, you'll hit a couple of those instances as we continue through.
All right, so let's talk about Bruce and Alfred on the tarmac. I loved this scene, and I thought it was a really good indicator of how Zack was trying to use humor and how humor could function in Zack's DC world that wasn't, you know, stupid quips in the middle of battle. It's just, you know, a little bit of snark here and there, so I really enjoyed that.
Might be a meta-human or two in Fiji. Costa Rica's nice.
A little bit of snark delivered by Jeremy Irons, which is always far more effective.
Yes.
Their relationship is great. You know, the two of them together is fantastic. I think it really builds off of what they established in BVS.
Yeah.
Again, as I sort of mentioned, I was caught off guard of just like Bruce's wealth. You know, the helicopter and the jet really hit me of just like, oh, damn, like I forgot how truly rich you are. And, you know, it goes back to another scene from theatrical of the wind-up penguins, you know, like they made those two do reshoots to add humor that wasn't funny when this character-driven humor, you know, that's rooted in who these people are is so much more effective.
Maybe a man who broods in a cave for a living isn't cut out to be a recruiter.
So theatrical cut opens with what is essentially Lois's entire storyline from Zack Snyder's Justice League condensed into whatever it is, 2 minutes. And I just thought that was horrendous.
What does it even have? I don't even remember.
It's like, it has a couple of the shots of like Lois walking with the umbrella and like she steps up to the Superman memorial.
Oh, that's in there? Interesting.
Yeah, but it's like cut in with like, you know, the Superman flag on the Tower Bridge and all this stuff. But I really liked that we took a moment to check in with Lois and her grief, because I think it still helped keep you tied to Superman. Because like in theatrical cut, you don't really like feel the weight of Superman that much until like they decide they're gonna go resurrect him. And I think that having Lois and having Bruce continue to like, you know, mention like, hey, we're doing it for him every so often just helps to kind of keep him present. And then also there's a Zack cameo.
Yes, director cameo, which
Loved
I think
it.
is fantastic. I also love that it establishes the fact that she has a routine that brings her by the Superman monument all the time, so that it isn't out of left field when you need her to be there later when Superman has been resurrected, because you've established the fact that she could be around in that area or frequents that area.
And it kind of gives you like an emotional tie to that cop too, that's there and in danger, you know? As opposed to just like being some random person. You're like, hey, you were like, nice to Lois. Like, we want to protect you now.
Right, exactly. And again, I don't know the song that they chose, but that is the first song that on rewatch multiple times, I still get goosebumps. Like the song that they chose to back her is so beautiful. Yeah. And I think it's a really wonderful, I love the shot, the up close shot of the engagement ring, which reminds you that she got that at the end of BVS and she's still wearing it, and her loss. Almost too, and I think we're gonna not to jump ahead, but when she goes for the last time, when she says I'm coming one more time, right, before he's resurrected, do you get the sense that she was ready to say, like, that was it, she was done, she was ready to say goodbye?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna...
She almost reached closure?
Yeah, I think she did, and I think that's the only reason why it worked to then like bring the two of them together and not have that be like a weird thing, because I feel like we kind of saw Lois go through her stages of grief throughout Zack Snyder's Justice League, and when she stepped up, I really felt like it was acceptance and closure, and like she's done, like she was gonna go back to the Daily Planet, and like I loved that.
You don't miss a day, do you?
Like it here.
So that brings us now to a lengthy action set piece that kind of plays out very similarly to the way that we saw it in 2017, which is Wonder Woman stopping the organic homegrown terrorists. And, you know, it's one of those elements when you watch it that maybe they changed the color grade a little bit of it. Maybe they made it look a little bit different. But for the most part, it does everything that it did in the initial theatrical cut.
But like way better.
For sure better.
And this scene is an example of, in our spoiler-free review, I talked about there are like a few things where you can tell in theatrical cut that they changed like a line of something, but it like made a huge impact. So at the end of this scene, Bruce Bolton, I don't know his real name, I'm gonna call him Bruce Bolton. Once Wonder Woman like stops all the bullets, he's like,
"What are you?"
And this is off screen, so it's clearly like ADR. And she says,
"A believer."
But then in Zack Snyder's Justice League, he's like,
"I don't believe it."
And Wonder Woman says,
"Believe it."
And then he goes to reload his gun again, and then she knocks him out. And I'm like, that's just so much like less cheesy and stupid.
It is less cheesy and stupid. And, you know, this is one of those examples of a rumor that people thought when Snyder Cut was still a rumor, that there were two bombs and that Diana stopped one but failed to stop the other. And that the explosion that you see from the outside of the building was going to be her not being able to stop the other. But we learn watching this cut now that it's her gauntlets being
And I like that
together.
they showed that, you know, because I feel like we don't often see like the impact that like the heroes have.
But then we cut to the cop outside on the street and we linger on him for 30 minutes.
Yes.
As we get his reaction. It's a long reaction shot from the cop outside.
So do you think Wonder Woman was supposed to be flying when she like took the bomb up into the air? Because she kind of like lingers up in the air a little bit and then she like glides back down. But I was like, I wonder if this could be interpreted.
I think it was just a super jump. I loved the moment with the little girl.
Yes, I was going to talk about that.
I loved it. I loved Diana calling her princess. I loved their interaction. You know, it feels like, okay, you tell me, it feels like a line, you know, that they included for little girl empowerment.
Yes.
Can I be like you someday?
You can be anything you want to be. Come on.
I always get like, I like physically like hide whenever I can like start to feel like a superhero movie is like about to do one of those like very obvious pandering type lines.
You,
it's like,
you want to talk about Captain Marvel?
No. But yeah, that entire movie. And so when this started to happen, like I was like, oh God, like what is gonna happen? Like the little girl asked a question and I'm like, oh my God, here we go. Like this is gonna completely take me out of it. But there's something about the nuance of the way that Gal delivers that line, and like maybe it's the music too and just the pacing and the way that she was kind of like, you okay, like beforehand, that just made it feel like very I don't want to say like authentic because I think that word's overused, but it just made it feel more genuine and like it resonated with me more so than anything else. I'm like trying to think of other examples of superhero films that have done that well without like making it a thing.
Well, let me bring up another example just from this movie, and that way we won't have to bring it up when we get to it later. But when Steppenwolf says like,
"This one will be mine,"
and she replies like,
I belong to no one.
I know why it's included, but when her delivery of that one wasn't nearly as effective to me as her telling the little girl, you could be anything you want to be.
Yeah, I was a little bit eye-rolly at that part.
Okay. Again, like, I don't hate the fact that they're including it. I get why they're including it, but you're so right that it has to be delivered the right way without it looking like we wrote this line so that people won't be mad at us.
Yeah, like it can't take you out of it. Like I think Birds of Prey does it really well during the fight scene where like really, really quickly, it takes like 2 seconds. Harley's just like, do you need a hair tie? Great. And then they keep fucking fighting. And it's like, that's how you do that. I mean, even that you could argue is probably a little bit too on the nose, but I don't know. I think it's, I mean, I'm not saying that I would know how to do it better, but I do think that this first example of Wonder Woman with a little girl is a really great way to do that. And so I was happy to see it.
Well, and part of the reason why it works as well as it does is that it then transitioned into one of the most badass fight sequences featured in the movie, which is the Amazons versus Steppenwolf.
Yes.
Daughters of Themyscira! Show him your fear! We have no fear!
This is another example of something that you know how it's going to play out because you've seen it in theatrical cut, but it's just better. It's so much about Zack Snyder's Justice League is yes, we've seen this, but this is the better version. And it was really fun to watch it with Michelle, who had not seen the theatrical cut at all, because she was on the edge of her seat as the Amazons were passing the mother box from person to person. And it leans into the R-rated violence that comes with this. It's a brutal, brutal fight. Steppenwolf gets pummeled with arrows. The Amazons are getting chopped with axes. They are fighting back and holding their own, but it just ultimately becomes, because it's so brutal, that when he succeeds, despite the Amazons' best effort, it convinces you that, like, all right, this is a serious threat, that it's going to take the full power of the League put together. Yes. And I was blown away by how they pulled it off.
I want to talk more about, because I think there was a criticism that was going around the internet when footage of this first was shown in like a teaser or something, and people were like, oh, Zack's being, showing violence against women, and like, oh my God, he's a sexist. And I just thought that was so stupid, because it's so cool to see all of these Amazons battling Steppenwolf. But I will say, this is a little bit of criticism, so sorry. Okay. And I know that there was not a huge budget, and I know all of that, but I think there was some CGI in this battle that kind of took me out of it a little bit. There's moments where, like, I think it's when Steppenwolf first like leaps up from the ocean and then starts charging, where like you see a bunch of horses and the Amazons like from the back, and then he like picks up a horse and like throws it, and I was just like, I just wish they had more money to like actually make this look more crisp, because it seemed like it was like they got there and it was just kind of like, this is all we can do because we don't have any more money. But or even I do just think about how cool it could have been.
What about practically? What about actually mounting the sheer amount of people on horses? Because you're right, it is very digital. And not to go back to Fabian Wagner, and what they pulled off in Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones in most of their battle sequences had legit dudes, in costume fighting. Yeah. And so I think that I wonder if it's a budget concern. I wonder if it was a time concern, because one of the things. Also,
I literally don't know how you would practically pick a horse up and then throw it.
Not that per se, but like, going back to rewatch, one of the things that really stood out is how cool it is when the first mother box starts to shake and crack, when all the Amazon warriors who are standing there, when they drop in and drop into defense position, and because it's all actual people doing it, that it's not CGI soldiers mimicking their precision, that you're like, oh, this looks amazing. So yeah, I would love if they brought that element to the larger battle, but it's hard to do when you have a spiky motherfucker, who's about to fight, and you got to do this choreography and get warriors on horses. It's hard, but I think that's a fair criticism. I think you're okay in pointing out the fact that, like.
But I mean, I still loved it. But if I can't. I think we have to bring it up because I think it is a little bit of fair criticism. I don't think it like ruins it by any means.
No, absolutely not. I think it looks really, really good. And so
and I think part of that's just Zack's style too, which is fine.
But go back to 300. The way that 300 looks like really authentic, and it's mostly green screen. It is green screen. So I wonder if it was a budget or time type thing.
It had to have been both. But something really quickly before we just kind of wrap up and talk about overall part one. When the parademons first came out of that boom tube, I was like, oh my God, they look like Cyborg in a way.
Interesting.
Like and I went back and looked at theatrical cut because I was like, well, did they always look like this? Like they look more like, I guess some of their features look more like pronounced, where they look like really machine-y to me, whereas in theatrical cut, that wasn't really like on my mind at all. Like, I don't know what I thought they were, but I just thought that was kind of a cool parallel, obviously.
It's a cool parallel, too, because his power and design comes from a mother box. So it's not too far off of how their designs would almost mirror each other.
So how do you think part one worked as a whole?
It's great. It's one of the first times that you're trying to figure out, like, I haven't got a chance to ask Zack. I hope we get a little bit more time with him at some point down the line, because I would love to ask him when and how he decided where the chapter breaks should go. Sometimes they are really natural and organic. This one ends right after they use the line,
"Men won't know what it means."
Men won't. She will.
Good chapter stop, good place to sort of take a break from the action. You just had an amazing set piece and you threw it in. But I didn't see a thematic yet continuity to, you know, all of this material is in this chapter for this reason, right? The chapter is called, what is Arthur's line to Bruce?
Don't count on it, Batman.
So that gets dismissed, you know, we do that and it's out of it. And it's not like that line to Batman sets up all the stuff that we're going to see over the rest of the chapter. I'm not quite sure that some of the chapters have titles that seem to be pretty thematic to what's going through it. This one doesn't necessarily.
Sure.
Because if you say don't count on it, Batman would mean that it would suggest that the recruitment of not just Aquaman, but the other members of the League were being met with resistance. And we don't get to that
So
point
that's
yet.
what I was going to ask you. So in the theatrical cut, we meet everybody pretty quickly,
Okay.
and in this we don't. So I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on kind of holding off on introducing Flash. And in a way, I know we see Victor for like a split second in the beginning, but he's not really explored or introduced in this.
Totally fine with that. Because even on a most recent rewatch, I paused it when we got to the history lesson, right? And I think by that point we had met. It's hard to remember like where things fall now at this point. I think Barry had his introduction.
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The history lesson when it arrives. Okay, so Diana has come to the Batcave and is starting to explain to Bruce the history of Darkseid and Steppenwolf. And I paused it, and it's an hour into the movie, and I couldn't believe that an hour of stuff had happened. Like that is I will say that the movie's long, you know, and I will say that it probably does work better in segments. But when you pause it after watching through it, like I still get blown away that like an hour of time has passed. That is astounding to me. So I never once, like over the course of this first hour or this first chapter, I was never like, well, where's Flash? Let's get to, you know,
Right.
when they come around, it feels organic and it feels natural. And I'm so invested in everything that's happening in the story up to that point that I don't feel like anyone is missing, or that he didn't do a really good job of balancing how much time everybody gets. I also don't know how you cut this down to 2 hours. Like, you know,
You shouldn't.
when I talk about things that I might trim out, you know, I'm talking like a minute or two here or there. I'm not talking
Exactly.
2 hours that I'm cutting out of this thing.
I honestly think in part one, all of the scenes that we got, we needed.
Yes, I think that's fair. I don't think that there's anything I would. Now, I might, on a rewatch, skip over something like the Diana terrorist scene. Because I feel like I've seen it so many times, you know, that I don't necessarily have to get to it. I'd rather get to something that's new and original. But it has to be there. And of course, if you're a diehard Wonder Woman fan, you'd love to see her in action, you know, so I totally understand.
Well, and this was supposed to come off of the solo movie for Wonder Woman. So like theoretically, people are sitting in the theater super hyped from that movie, and that's what they want to see. So I think giving people that in part one was a good move.
Absolutely. Yeah, so all of it worked for that reason.
All right. Well, that's part one. I think we spent longer talking about it than it actually plays out on screen.
Oh, that's not true. We have to break it down. We got to analyze all this stuff.
But yeah, overall, I thought it was a really strong first chapter.
Yes, and it conveys us into chapter 2, which we will be back with a full breakdown with in our next video. So make sure that you hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and we will continue to break down Zack Snyder's Justice League in our next video, hitting the channel very soon.